I want you to picture a very specific place in your mind right now.
Oh, setting the scene. I like it.
Yeah, so imagine you're in the Barbagia region of Sardinia. It's this mountainous, somewhat isolated area right in the Mediterranean.
Beautiful area, by the way.
Truly stunning.
Yeah.
But if you were to just walk through one of the villages there, you'd notice something that, statistically speaking, is almost impossible.
Right. The demographics are completely wild.
Exactly. In this specific region, men are living to be 100 years old at 10 times the rate of men in the United States.
10 times. That's not a rounding error. That is a massive biological anomaly.
It's insane. And here is the wildest part about this statistic for you listening right now. These centenarians, they aren't like biohacking.
No ice baths at 4 a.m.
No ice baths. They are not taking 12 different proprietary supplements every morning. They are definitely not tracking their REM sleep with some expensive wearable device.
And they aren't going to the gym either. Right. They don't have gym memberships. And they are regularly drinking wine. Yet they are living an entire century with this incredible vitality, sharp minds, and just, deep joy.
Which creates this massive cognitive dissonance for anyone who is steeped in our modern hustle culture.
Oh, completely.
Because we're totally conditioned to believe that longevity and success and just peak effectiveness in general requires this grueling, white-knuckled grip on our daily lives.
Yeah, the idea that you have to optimize every waking second just to survive the week.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why we are looking at this today. We are exploring the biological paradox of why the hardest working, most hyper-optimized people often end up burning out at age 40.
While the people who take daily naps and tend their gardens are casually living a whole century.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to uncover the actual evidence-based blueprint of a well-lived life. And to do that, we aren't just looking at one discipline. We have a massive stack of research to synthesize today.
Yeah, we are pulling from a remarkably diverse set of fields for this one. We really are. We've got neuroscientific reviews detailing how practices like gratitude physically alter brain structures.
We're looking at clinical psychology too, specifically Carol Dweck's foundational research on the growth mindset.
Plus the definitive modern texts on human behavior. So James Clear's Atomic Habits and Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit.
And we are laying all those behavioral mechanics over the sort of overarching strategic frameworks found in Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Which is a classic for a reason. And finally, we are anchoring all of this in the demographic reality of the blue zones. Those are the places like that village in Sardinia where living to 100 is just, well, the standard baseline.
Now, if you're listening to this, you have probably heard of some of these concepts before.
Oh, for sure. Most people in the self-improvement space know about the growth mindset or the concept of a habit loop.
But what usually happens is that these ideas are presented in total isolation, like a bulleted list in a quick summary article online.
Right, and we are not doing a book report today. We are going to thread these mechanisms together.
Which is the only way it actually makes sense.
Exactly. So we'll start at the microscopic level, looking at the physical hardware of your brain and how it rewires itself.
Then we'll look at how to program that hardware using the micromechanics of daily habits.
From there, we scale up to how you manage your time and your identity over a lifespan. And finally, we will look at how your external environment might be the single biggest factor in whether or not any of this actually works.
So the logical place to begin is with the physical hardware.
The brain itself.
Right. Because if we're going to spend the next hour talking about changing our behavior, becoming more resilient, building better routines, stepping out of burnout, we have to first establish that change is physically possible.
At a biological level.
Exactly. And for a long time, the scientific consensus was actually incredibly pessimistic about this.
Oh, you mean the old wet clay theory of the brain?
Yeah, the wet clay theory. It's this idea that in childhood, your brain is like wet clay. It's highly adaptable, very impressionable.
You can learn languages easily, pick up instruments.
Right. But the theory went that by the time you hit your mid-20s, that clay goes into the kiln and it hardens.
Which sounds so bleak.
It's a terrifying thought when you really consider the implications. It implies that if you struggle with anxiety or if you have a terrible temper or if you just lack focus at age 30, well, you're simply stuck with that hardware until you die.
You're just broken.
Right. But the advent of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI technology, completely shattered that assumption.
Because we could suddenly see inside the black box.
Exactly. We can now watch the brain operate in real time, and what we see is continuous, lifelong neuroplasticity.
The brain never actually hardens.
Never. It is constantly pruning dead connections and forging new neural pathways based on what you pay attention to and what you practice. So the hardware is infinitely adaptable.
Okay, so most of our listeners know psychologist Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset.
The defining work on the subject, yeah.
But what the self-help summaries usually leave out is the actual neuroimaging behind it. It's not just some positive affirmation you tell yourself in the mirror. It's a biological state of being.
It really is. Let's break down the physical manifestation of that. So, Dweck identified that people generally operate with either a fixed mindset, believing traits are innate and unchangeable, or a growth mindset, believing abilities can be developed through effort and strategy.
Right, the classic, I'm just not a math person versus I haven't learned this math yet.
Exactly. So when researchers put individuals into fMRI machines and give them a really difficult task where they are likely to make mistakes, the brain scans of the two groups look completely different.
What exactly is lighting up differently in those scans?
Well, in the brains of individuals exhibiting a growth mindset, we see a massive surge of activation in two very specific regions right when they make an error.
Okay, what are they?
The first is the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. The second is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC.
Okay, let's avoid getting bogged down in the Latin terms. For those of us without neuroscience degrees, what is the ACC actually doing in that moment?
Think of the ACC as the brain's error detection and conflict monitoring department.
Like an internal alarm system.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It is the alarm system that triggers when reality doesn't match your expectation. When you make a typo or you play the wrong chord on a guitar, the ACC fires.
And what about the DLPFC?
The DLPFC is the brain's executive command center for adapting behavior and cognitive flexibility.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's the part that says, okay, the alarm went off. How do we adjust our grip on the guitar to fix it next time?
So, in a growth mindset, a mistake causes the brain to physically allocate massive amounts of energy to processing the error and formulating a new strategy.
Precisely.
The brain is literally feeding on the mistake to build a better neural pathway.
The brain is highly active during the actual process of learning. But here's the kicker. In a fixed mindset, that ACC and DLPFC activation is severely muted during an error.
Wait, really? It just doesn't light up.
It barely lights up at all during the mistake. Instead, the fixed mindset brain shows peak activation only when it receives the final grade or the final judgment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the brain isn't processing how to get better. It is only processing the emotional weight of being judged as a success or a failure.
That makes so much sense when you look at how people behave in the workplace.
How so?
Well, if your brain doesn't allocate energy to analyzing an error, you will just keep making the exact same error.
Yeah.
But you'll develop a ton of anxiety around the performance review.
Because the review is the only thing the brain cares about. And this brings us to one of the most vital principles of neurobiology, which is Hebbian plasticity.
Fire together, wire together.
Exactly. The shorthand phrasing is neurons that fire together, wire together.
Right.
Every time you consciously choose to view a setback as a data point rather than a personal indictment, you are forcing the ACC and the DLPFC to fire in a specific sequence.
You're forcing the blood flow.
You are manually directing blood flow and electrical activity. And the more you do that, the thicker and more efficient that neural pathway becomes.
You know, I used to hear analogies about neuroplasticity, comparing it to, like, a dirt road that eventually gets paved.
Yeah, that's a common one.
But that feels a bit too mechanical for me. I prefer to think of neuroplasticity like water carving a canyon.
Oh, I like that.
Right, because the very first time you try to reframe a failure into a learning opportunity, it's just this tiny trickle of water trying to find a path down a really rocky mountain.
It's incredibly difficult.
Exactly. There's massive friction and the water keeps getting diverted. But if you keep pouring that water down the same route, day after day, it starts to carve a little groove.
And the friction decreases.
Yes. Give it enough time and enough repetition, and that tiny trickle carves the Grand Canyon. It becomes the path of absolute least resistance. The water literally cannot flow anywhere else.
That is a beautiful and highly accurate representation of neural pruning and myelination. Yeah, as a pathway is used repeatedly, the brain wraps those specific neurons in a fatty substance called myelin. It acts like insulation on a copper wire, dramatically speeding up the electrical transmission.
So you are biologically optimizing the growth mindset.
Exactly. But the research we are looking at doesn't just apply this physical rewiring to learning math or analyzing spreadsheets.
No, it goes much deeper.
It applies this exact same neurobiological mechanism to our emotional states. Specifically, our sources include a deep dive into the neuroscience of gratitude.
And this is fascinating because we tend to think of gratitude as a soft skill.
We really do.
We think of it as just a polite social construct, saying thank you so people like us. But the data shows it is a potent mechanical biological intervention.
It is arguably one of the most powerful cognitive interventions we have access to as human beings.
Which is saying a lot.
It is, because when we look at the neuroimaging of people engaged in deliberate gratitude practices, like keeping a detailed daily journal of things they are thankful for, we see a distinct gratitude network strengthening in the brain.
Okay, so what are the actual components of that network? What's lighting up?
Well, it primarily involves the medial prefrontal cortex, the MPFC. That's responsible for how we assign value to things and how we think about ourselves in relation to others.
The MPFC.
It also involves that same ACC we just discussed, which is processing the emotional resonance of the memory. But the most crucial player here is the ventral striatum.
Wait, that's the dopamine center, isn't it? The brain's core reward circuitry.
Yes, exactly. The ventral striatum is the exact same region that lights up when you eat incredible food or when you win money or when you receive a massive compliment.
So on a purely chemical level, experiencing gratitude is intrinsically rewarding.
It is. Your brain dispenses dopamine when you actively appreciate something. But the magic of the gratitude network isn't just the dopamine hit.
There's more.
Oh yeah, it is what that activated network does to the rest of the brain. Specifically, a strong MPFC exercises top-down regulatory control over the amygdala.
The amygdala being the ancient reptilian part of our brain that scans for threats. The panic button.
Right. And in our modern environment, our amygdalas are hyperactive.
Constantly firing.
We are constantly bombarded with stressful emails, news alerts, financial pressures. The amygdala perceives these as literal life or death threats.
Like a tiger is chasing us.
Exactly, keeping us in a state of chronic sympathetic nervous system arousal, fight or flight. But when you activate the gratitude network, the MPFC sends inhibitory signals to the amygdala.
It tells it to chill out.
It essentially tells the panic button to stand down.
And the physiological cascade from that is massive, isn't it? Like if we quiet the amygdala, what happens in the rest of the body?
We fundamentally alter the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay, walk me through that.
When the amygdala stands down, the hypothalamus stops telling the pituitary gland to signal the adrenal glands to pump out cortisol.
So cortisol plummets.
Cortisol plummets. And when cortisol drops, your heart rate variability, which is the tiny fluctuations in time between your heartbeats, increases.
And high HRV is good, right?
High heart rate variability is a prime indicator of a resilient, adaptable nervous system. Furthermore, the research shows that sustaining this state lowers the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically one called IL-6.
Okay, we hear the word inflammation thrown around a lot in health circles. But what does elevated IL-6 actually feel like for the person listening to this right now, like on a Tuesday afternoon?
Good question. If you've ever gone through a period of intense, unrelenting stress at work and you start to feel that deep, heavy, achy fatigue in your bones.
Oh yeah, like you're walking through mud.
Right. You feel lethargic, your brain is foggy, your joints might even ache, and you feel like you are right on the verge of catching the flu, but the flu never quite breaks.
I know exactly what you mean.
That is systemic inflammation. That is a cytokine storm in miniature, driven by chronic stress. So when we say gratitude physically lowers IL-6, we are saying it actively turns off the biological mechanisms that are making you feel sick, tired, and achy.
Which connects directly to the research in our stack about brain-gut therapies.
It does. Gastroenterologists are now treating conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, not just with diet changes, but with cognitive emotional training.
Really? Treating the gut with the brain.
Yes, because the enteric nervous system in your gut is in constant communication with your brain via the vagus nerve.
Right.
If your amygdala is constantly firing because of work stress, your gut receives a signal that you are in a war zone, and digestion either shuts down entirely or becomes totally erratic.
So by training the brain to access growth and gratitude pathways.
You lower the threat perception, tone the vagus nerve, and physically stabilize intestinal function. You simply cannot separate the mind from the body.
I mean, that is incredible. But I do need to push back on this a little bit, though, because we are walking a very fine line here.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a massive movement right now pushing toxic positivity. This cultural mandate that you must smile through your trauma, ignore systemic problems, and just, find the silver lining while your house is literally burning down.
It's everywhere.
Right. So if someone is stuck in a highly toxic work environment or facing a serious illness, isn't telling them to practice gratitude, it's just asking them to be delusional. Like, what is the mechanical difference between toxic positivity and this neurobiological recalibration?
That is honestly the most important distinction we can make in this entire section.
Because it feels like a trap.
It is a trap. Toxic positivity is fundamentally an act of suppression. It is the denial of reality. And neurologically speaking, emotional suppression is disastrous.
What happens when you suppress it?
Studies show that when you try to suppress a negative emotion, amygdala activation actually increases.
Wait, really? It gets worse.
Yes. The threat response gets louder because you are fighting your own internal signals. Your cortisol spikes, your inflammation goes up. Toxic positivity physically damages your hardware.
So the brain knows you're lying to it.
Absolutely. The brain knows. Gratitude, as a clinical intervention, is not about denying pain or ignoring reality.
Then what is it?
It is about expanding your attentional filters. It is the ability to say, my house is currently burning down and this is terrifying and devastating, and simultaneously say, I am incredibly grateful that my family made it out safely, and I am grateful for the firefighters.
Okay, I see the difference.
You are not suppressing the negative emotion. You are actively engaging the MPFC and the ventral striatum alongside it.
So you're giving yourself the tools to deal with the fire.
Exactly. You are providing your nervous system with the biological resources, the dopamine, the lowered cortisol, to prevent the amygdala from completely overwhelming your cognitive function.
And is not delusion.
No, it is strength training for your nervous system so you can navigate the crisis effectively.
That reframing changes everything. It's not about ignoring the dark. It's about turning on a flashlight so you can see the whole room.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we have established the foundation here. Our hardware is plastic. Water can carve a new canyon. We can physically rewire our brains to look for growth and to downregulate our threat responses.
Right.
But how do we actually execute this on a random Tuesday morning?
That's the challenge.
Because if I want to translate all this beautiful neuroplasticity into waking up at 6 a.m., exercising, and doing focused deep work without scrolling on my phone.
Which is what everyone wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do I type those commands into the system?
This is where we transition from the biological hardware to the behavioral software. We have to look at the micromechanics of change, the atomic units of our daily lives, which are our habits.
And for this, we are drawing heavily on the brilliant frameworks provided by Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit and James Clear in Atomic Habits.
Two foundational texts.
I think most of us have a deeply flawed understanding of how habits actually work. We tend to think of our daily routines as a series of conscious choices, like, I choose to drink coffee. I choose to check my email.
But Duhigg points out that nearly half of all our daily actions are not conscious decisions at all.
Half of them.
Almost half. They are automatic neurological scripts running in the background.
And this evolutionary adaptation exists for a very good reason.
A very good reason. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex decision-making, willpower, and conscious thought, is incredibly energy-intensive.
It just burns through fuel.
It demands massive amounts of glucose. If you had to consciously think about every single step involved in driving your car to work,
Oh, man.
like how much pressure to put on the gas pedal, when to check the rearview mirror, how to turn the steering wheel, your brain would exhaust its energy supply before you even reached the office.
So the brain creates a shortcut to save energy.
It creates a shortcut, and it physically moves the execution of that shortcut out of the prefrontal cortex and down into an older, deeper, more primal part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
Basal ganglia.
Yes. The basal ganglia is the brain's habit storage drive. Once a behavior is stored down there, it requires almost zero conscious energy to execute.
Which is fantastic when the habit is brushing your teeth or driving a car.
Right.
But it is an absolute nightmare when the habit is eating a sleeve of cookies at midnight or checking social media every time you feel a slight pang of boredom.
Because the brain doesn't judge whether the habit is good or bad, it just runs the script.
Exactly. So how do we access the basal ganglia to rewrite that script? Duhigg breaks it down into a painfully simple three-part loop. Cue, routine, reward.
That is the anatomy of every habit, good or bad.
Okay, break those down for us.
The cue is the trigger. It is the sensory input that tells the basal ganglia, access habit program number 47.
Right.
The routine is the behavior itself, physical, mental, or emotional. And the reward is the feedback loop. It is the dopamine hit that tells the brain, yes, this sequence felt good. Let's remember to do it again next time the cue appears.
And the most profound insight from Duhigg's work is the golden rule of habit change. He argues that you cannot simply extinguish a bad habit.
You can't just delete it.
You cannot just delete the program from the basal ganglia.
Yeah.
You have to overwrite it.
Yes.
You must keep the exact same cue, you must deliver the exact same reward, but you insert a completely new routine in the middle.
But to do that, you have to become an active investigator of your own life.
Because we usually don't even notice the cues.
Most of the time, we have no idea what our cues or rewards are. We just experience the compulsion. But Duhigg found that almost all habit cues fall into one of 5 distinct categories.
And what are those?
It's usually a specific location, a certain time of day, a particular emotional state, the presence of specific other people, or an immediately preceding action.
Okay, let's run a hypothetical scenario to make this concrete. Let's say you have a horrible habit of doom scrolling on your phone for an hour every night in bed, and it's just ruining your sleep.
A very common scenario.
Very common. The routine is obvious, scrolling. But what is the cue and the reward?
You have to test it. Is the cue the time of day? Is it 11:00 p.m.? Is it the location? The fact that you're lying in bed? Or is it an emotional state, like exhaustion and a desire to escape the anxiety of the upcoming workday?
Let's say you determine the cue is that emotional state of end-of-day anxiety, combined with the location of the bed.
Okay, so that's your cue. Now, what is the reward?
It's probably not the actual content on the phone, because doom scrolling usually makes us feel worse.
Right, nobody feels great after reading 50 angry tweets.
Exactly. So the reward is likely the temporary numbing effect. It's the sheer distraction that prevents you from thinking about tomorrow's to-do list.
Exactly. So if you try to use raw willpower to just, stop looking at your phone, you will almost certainly fail.
Because the loop is still active.
The cue anxiety in bed is still firing, and the brain is screaming for the reward, distraction, and numbing. The golden rule says, keep the cue, keep the reward, change the routine.
So what's the new routine?
When you get into bed and feel that anxiety, which is your cue, instead of grabbing the phone, you pick up a highly engaging fiction book. That's your new routine.
Oh, I see.
You still get the distraction and the numbing of your workday worries your reward, but the new routine doesn't blast your retinas with blue light and cortisol-inducing news.
And over time, the basal ganglia wires the new routine to the old cue.
Exactly.
This maps perfectly onto James Clear's work in Atomic Habits. Clear takes this mechanical understanding of the loop and builds an entire architecture for continuous improvement around it. He introduces the math of the 1% improvement.
The math is staggering when you actually look at the compounding effect over time.
Yeah, run the numbers for us.
Clear points out that if you get just 1% better at something every single day for a year, mathematically you end up 37 times better by the end of that year.
37 times.
Yeah. And conversely, getting 1% worse every day compounds until you degrade down to nearly 0.
Okay, but let me push back on this 1% math for a second.
Sure.
Because I see this quoted all the time on productivity blogs, and it always feels a bit detached from human reality.
How so?
Well, human behavior isn't a financial algorithm. I might improve my sleep habits by 1% for 12 days, but on day 13, I get the flu, or my kid gets sick, or a massive crisis hits at work, and my routine is completely shattered.
Life happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Doesn't this relentless focus on compounding daily improvement just create a new kind of neurotic anxiety when we inevitably break the chain?
That is exactly the trap of treating the 1% rule as a rigid goal rather than a philosophical approach. And this is why Clear makes what I consider his most important distinction. Forget about setting goals and focus entirely on your systems.
You not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems.
It might be the most quoted line of the decade.
It really might be. But what does it actually mean in practice for you, the listener?
A goal is simply the desired outcome. The goal is lose 20 pounds or write a book. A system is the collection of daily habits and processes that lead to outcomes. If your goal is to write a book, but your system is waking up exhausted, scrolling social media for an hour, and then staring at a blank screen hoping for inspiration, you will fall to the level of that terrible system, regardless of how badly you want the goal.
I think of it like taking a road trip. The goal is the destination, say, reaching the Grand Canyon, but the system is the actual vehicle you are driving.
Right.
If you are sitting in a car with 4 flat tires and a blown transmission, staring harder at the map and visualizing the Grand Canyon is not going to get you there. You have to fix the engine. You have to optimize the vehicle.
And Clear provides the mechanic's manual for fixing that vehicle with his 4 laws of behavior change. He maps these directly onto Duhigg's habit loop.
Let's go through those laws.
If you want to build a good habit, you must make it obvious, manipulating the cue. Make it attractive, amplifying the craving. Make it easy, simplifying the routine. And make it satisfying, guaranteeing the reward.
And to break a bad habit.
You just invert the laws. Make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying.
Let's apply these laws to a very common modern struggle. In our stack of sources, we have several articles on well-being and maintaining boundaries when working from home.
Oh, that's a huge issue right now.
It is. I tried working from a tiny apartment during the pandemic, and when your office desk is literally 2 feet away from your bed, the boundaries completely collapse.
There is no physical separation.
None. You end up working at 10 p.m. or watching Netflix at 2 p.m. How do the 4 laws solve this when our physical environment is actively working against us?
It requires engineering your environment to control the cues. The first law is make it obvious, but the inverse is make it invisible.
Right.
If your laptop is sitting on your kitchen table next to your dinner plate, the cue to work is constantly firing while you are trying to eat. You have to create strict visual boundaries.
So even in a tiny apartment?
Even in a tiny apartment, maybe your work laptop only exists on one specific corner of one specific table, and when the workday ends, it goes inside a drawer, out of sight. You are making the cue for work invisible during your off hours.
And what about the third law? Make it easy. The article suggests taking micro breaks and moving every hour to prevent physical burnout.
If you rely on willpower to do a full 30-minute workout in the middle of the day, you will fail, because willpower is that finite prefrontal cortex energy we talked about earlier.
Right, it gets depleted.
By 2 p.m., your prefrontal cortex is exhausted from making decisions, so you make it easy. You reduce the friction to absolute 0.
What does that look like?
Don't plan a workout. Just put a foam roller right next to your desk chair so you literally trip over it when you stand up. Put a water bottle in another room so you are forced to walk 50 steps every time you need a drink. You are lowering the activation energy required to execute the routine.
You're basically treating yourself like a toddler.
You kind of have to.
You're tricking your basal ganglia into doing the right thing because you know your conscious brain is going to be too tired to make the right choice later in the day.
Precisely. You are outsourcing the effort to the environment and the system. But we do run into a scaling problem here.
Right. Section 3, the scaling problem. Because if I sit down and try to apply the 4 laws to every single behavior in my life, drinking water, stretching, reading, meditating, eating greens, calling my mother, managing that many microsystems becomes a full-time job.
It sounds absolutely exhausting.
It is. We need a way to get exponential returns on our behavioral investments. We need dominoes that knock over other dominoes.
Which brings us to the concept of keystone habits. In Duhigg's research, he found that not all habits are created equal.
Some are more powerful than others.
Exactly. Some habits, when shifted, cause a massive ripple effect that alters other, seemingly unrelated areas of a person's life without any conscious effort. They are the keystone in the arch. If you put it in place, everything else holds together.
What is the classic example of this in the data?
The most thoroughly documented keystone habit is physical exercise.
Really? Just working out?
Yeah. When researchers study individuals who start a new exercise routine, even something as minimal as walking twice a week, they observe a fascinating phenomenon.
What happens?
These individuals organically start eating better. They didn't set a goal to diet, but their food choices naturally shift. They start using their credit cards less, so their finances improve. They show more patience with their colleagues and families. They procrastinate less at work.
Wait, why does that happen? How does going for a walk fix your credit card debt? That sounds like magic.
It's not magic. It has to do with how keystone habits shift our self-perception. Exercise provides a series of small, undeniable daily wins. You completed the walk. You did the thing you said you were going to do.
So you start trusting yourself.
Exactly. This proves to your brain that change is possible, which increases your overall self-efficacy. It initiates a cascade of neurological confidence that bleeds into how you handle your finances and your relationships.
And this bridges us directly into what I think is the most profound concept in all of James Clear's work. Identity-based habits.
Oh, this is the core of it all.
Clear argues that true, lasting behavior change is never actually about the behavior itself. It is about identity change.
He argues that your current behaviors are simply a physical reflection of your current identity. What you do on a daily basis is a mirror image of the type of person you subconsciously believe yourself to be.
So if you want to change your behavior permanently, You have to shift the underlying identity.
Right. The example he uses in the book is brilliant.
Oh, the smoking example.
Yes. Imagine two people who are trying to quit smoking, and they are both offered a cigarette. The first person declines and says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit."
Which sounds completely reasonable to most of us.
It sounds reasonable, but think about the identity embedded in that sentence. That person still identifies as a smoker. They are a smoker who is currently trying to perform a very difficult action resisting a cigarette.
The internal friction is massive because they are fighting who they think they are.
Exactly. Now look at the second person. They are offered the cigarette, and they simply say, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker."
Boom. It's a completely different paradigm.
It changes everything. The second person has shifted their identity. They no longer view themselves as someone who smokes. Therefore, declining the cigarette doesn't require massive amounts of prefrontal cortex willpower.
It doesn't require a heroic struggle against temptation.
Right. Declining the cigarette is simply the logical, frictionless action that aligns with who they are. The behavior follows the identity.
Claire has this incredible quote. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. I think about that constantly.
It's a great visualization.
Every time I sit down and write a single paragraph, even if it's a terrible paragraph, I am casting a vote that I am a writer. Every time someone chooses to drink a glass of water instead of a soda, they're casting a vote that they are a healthy person.
We can connect this to the well-being articles in our sources regarding practices like a digital detox.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
A lot of people approach taking a weekend off from social media as a purely mechanical goal. I need to reduce my screen time. But if you apply Clear's framework, putting your phone in a drawer for the weekend isn't just a mechanical act. It is a powerful vote.
You are casting a vote that you are the type of person who values deep, uninterrupted presence.
You are voting that you are someone who controls your attention rather than letting algorithms control it. The small habit builds the larger identity.
But I have to admit, as inspiring as that sounds, it also feels incredibly intimidating.
How so?
Well, if I wake up on a Monday morning feeling burnt out, overweight, and distracted, and I tell myself, okay, today I need to completely change my identity and become a focused, athletic person. That feels like standing at the bottom of Mount Everest in flip-flops.
It is a paralyzing leap.
It really is. How do we make that identity shift without triggering the amygdala's threat response we talked about earlier?
You don't make a leap. That is the genius of the system. You do not change your deeply held beliefs about yourself instantly.
So no shouting positive affirmations into the mirror.
No, because your brain won't believe you. You don't just look in the mirror, shout that you're an athlete, and suddenly believe it. The brain requires evidence.
Right.
You change your identity by accumulating an overwhelming mountain of micro-evidence through tiny atomic actions.
So the votes have to be counted over time.
Exactly. The paradox of making a 1% improvement, doing one push-up, writing one sentence, meditating for 2 minutes, is that on any given day, the action seems utterly meaningless.
Yeah, a single push-up does not change your physique at all.
But it casts a vote. Over 6 months, you accumulate thousands of tiny votes. Eventually, the sheer weight of the evidence forces your brain to concede, I guess I am the type of person who works out. The identity shift is the lagging measure of your habits.
Okay, this is the perfect pivot point for our deep dive. We have been entirely focused internally up to this point.
We stayed inside the brain.
We've looked at the neuroplastic hardware of the brain, the software of the growth mindset, the internal neurological loops of habit formation, and the psychology of identity.
But a well-lived life doesn't happen in a vacuum inside our skulls.
No, we have to interact with the external world. We have to deal with bosses, emails, societal expectations, and just the chaos of modern life.
We need an external architecture. Once we have optimized the internal machine, how do we structure our days, our weeks, and our relationships to be truly effective on a macro scale?
And for this, we bring in the towering classic of the genre, Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
A phenomenal book.
What makes Covey's framework so enduring is that it isn't just a list of productivity hacks. It is a comprehensive philosophy of human development. He maps out a deliberate progression from a state of dependence to independence and finally to interdependence.
Most people skip the foundational philosophy and just look for the time management tips. But you cannot execute the later habits without the foundation.
You have to start at the beginning.
The first 3 habits are entirely focused on moving from dependence to personal independence. It is about mastering yourself before you try to interact with the world. And it begins with habit 1, be proactive.
The word proactive has been completely ruined by corporate jargon, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
We think it just means taking initiative or sending an email before your boss asks for it. But Covey's definition is infinitely deeper. He roots this habit heavily in the work of Viktor Frankl.
The psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Right. And Frankl's insight is one of the most powerful concepts in modern psychology. After observing human behavior in the most horrific, unimaginable conditions of the concentration camps, Frankl realized a fundamental truth about human consciousness.
He observed that between any external stimulus, an insult, a physical hardship, a global crisis, and your response to that stimulus, there is a space.
A microscopic space.
And in that space lies your ultimate freedom and power to choose your response.
No matter what happens to you, the space between stimulus and response belongs entirely to you. That is what Covey means by being proactive.
It is the recognition that you are not simply a reflexive product of your environment, your genetics, or your childhood conditioning. You are a programmer who can choose the script.
Covey visualizes this by having us imagine two concentric circles.
Right. The circle of concern and the circle of influence.
Let's start with the outer circle, the circle of concern. This contains everything you worry about: the national economy, the threat of war, what your coworkers secretly think of you, the weather.
You spend massive amounts of emotional energy worrying about these things, but you have absolutely zero direct control over them.
And the inner circle.
The inner circle is your circle of influence. This contains the things you have absolute direct control over. Your attitude, your daily habits, the words you use, how you treat your family, your reaction to a setback.
Highly effective people, Covey argues, ruthlessly focus their time and energy on their circle of influence.
And as they do, that circle organically expands.
Which maps perfectly back to Dweck's growth mindset.
Oh, absolutely it does.
A person with a fixed mindset is entirely focused on the circle of concern, worrying about being judged by others, worrying about whether they are inherently smart enough. But a growth mindset focuses entirely on the circle of influence, the process, the effort, the strategy.
It is the exact same mechanism applied to external reality. Once you take responsibility for your circle of influence, you move to habit 2. Begin with the end in mind.
All things are created twice.
Covey states that there is a mental creation and then a physical creation. The blueprint must precede the building. He advocates fiercely for writing a personal mission statement.
Why is that so crucial?
Because if you don't know your ultimate destination, applying James Clear's atomic habits will just make you very efficient at running in the wrong direction.
Right, which leads us to the daily execution of that mission. Habit 3, put first things first. This is where Covey introduces a tool that has become legendary in time management and organizational psychology: the Eisenhower Matrix.
The matrix is brilliant because it forces you to confront how poorly you are likely prioritizing your day.
Oh, it's a harsh mirror.
It divides all your possible actions into 4 quadrants based on 2 distinct metrics: importance and urgency.
Most of us completely conflate those two words, don't we? We think if something is urgent, it must be important.
And that is the root cause of modern burnout. Let's break down the quadrants. Quadrant first is both urgent and important.
These are your true crises. The kitchen is on fire. Your big client is threatening to leave right now. A family member is in the hospital.
You have to manage these. They require immediate action.
Now, quadrant third is the tricky one. This is urgent, but not important.
These are the distractions equipped with deadlines. Your phone ringing, a coworker dropping by your desk to gossip about an issue that needs to be solved today, a flurry of Slack notifications.
The urgency creates a physiological reaction in your amygdala, tricking your brain into thinking the task is important.
But it doesn't actually align with your personal mission statement. Covey says we must relentlessly delegate or minimize quadrant third.
Quadrant fourth is not urgent and not important. This is pure, unadulterated escapism. Mindlessly scrolling TikTok for 3 hours, binge-watching reality TV when you intended to sleep.
We need to eliminate this quadrant as much as possible.
But the absolute goldmine of human effectiveness, the place where deeply fulfilling lives are forged, is quadrant 2.
Quadrant 2. Important, but not urgent.
This quadrant includes long-term strategic planning, deep relationship building, preventative health maintenance, learning a new language, reading a complex book.
These activities are the most critical things for your ultimate success and longevity.
But here's the biological catch. Because they are not urgent, they do not trigger the amygdala. They never scream for your attention.
Let's cross-reference this with the physiological science we discussed earlier, because this is where the theory hits reality. Think about sleep.
Getting 8 hours of high-quality sleep is a fundamentally crucial Quadrant 2 activity.
It clears amyloid plaques from your brain, it repairs your heart, it solidifies your neuroplastic pathways. It is deeply important.
But at 11:30 p.m., when you were trying to finish a presentation for your boss, sleep does not feel urgent. The presentation feels urgent.
Because the presentation has a deadline, it triggers a stress response. Your prefrontal cortex is hijacked by the perceived urgency of quadrant third or three-third. Consequently, you sacrifice quadrant 2.
You stay up late.
The tragedy of modern life is that almost all preventative well-being, hydration, meditation, exercise, deep conversation with a spouse lives in quadrant 2. And if you do not proactively schedule quadrant 2, it will be cannibalized by the screaming demands of the other quadrants.
I think of the Eisenhower matrix like triage in a chaotic emergency room. The tragic reality is that most of us are running around frantically putting bandages on paper cuts. Those are the urgent but unimportant emails and notifications.
Meanwhile, we're completely ignoring the slow-moving heart attack of chronic sleep deprivation, a failing marriage, and burnout. All because a slow-moving heart attack isn't making a loud beeping noise today.
Exactly. To be highly effective, you have to become a ruthless doctor of your own life and prioritize the silent, important things.
That is a stark but entirely accurate analogy. Covey argues that we must manage quadrant 4, completely ignore third and 4, and maximize the time spent in quadrant 2.
Now, once you master these first 3 habits, you achieve personal independence. Only then are you capable of moving to interdependence, working effectively with the rest of humanity.
The public victories. Habit 4 is think win-win, which is moving away from a scarcity mindset into an abundance mindset, seeking mutually beneficial solutions rather than zero-sum victories.
Habit 5 is deeply important for our divided culture. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Empathic listening.
Covey brilliantly layers the ancient Greek philosophy of persuasion onto this habit. He talks about ethos, pathos, and logos.
Ethos being your personal credibility, pathos being your empathic alignment with the other person's feelings, and logos being the logic of your argument.
Most people jump straight to logos. They try to logic their way through an argument with a spouse or a coworker. But Covey points out that if you haven't established trust ethos and you haven't demonstrated that you deeply understand their emotional perspective pathos, they will not even process your logic.
You are basically speaking to a brick wall.
And when you achieve that understanding, you unlock habit sunks, synergize, combining different perspectives to create a solution that is greater than the sum of its parts.
But the entire architecture of these 6 habits rests on the final foundational practice, Habit 7.
Habit 7, sharpen the saw. It is the habit of continuous, balanced renewal across 4 dimensions: physical, mental, social, and emotional, and spiritual.
Taking the time to exercise, to read deeply, to foster connections, to meditate or pray. Covey describes this as an upward spiral of growth.
And look at what he is actually describing there. When Covey says sharpen the saw, he is describing the active daily maintenance of neuroplasticity.
He really is.
He is talking about keeping the brain in a growth mindset, lowering the amygdala response, and utilizing habit loops to maintain the physiological machine that executes all the other habits. It brings us full circle back to the biology.
You are ensuring the physical hardware remains capable of running the complex software. Okay, this brings us to the grand finale of our deep dive.
The final destination.
We have optimized everything. We have rewired our brains with gratitude to lower inflammation. We have decoded our basal ganglia to build atomic identity-based habit loops. We have ruthlessly structured our schedules using the Eisenhower matrix to prioritize quadrant 2.
We are now functioning as machines of relentless, highly optimized effectiveness.
But we have to zoom all the way out and ask the ultimate question. Where does all this lead? What is the final destination, the ultimate ROI of a thoroughly well-lived life?
To answer that, we have to look at the macro data of human existence. We turn to the demographic research initiated by Dan Buettner in collaboration with National Geographic.
The blue zones.
Buettner set out to find the places on Earth with the highest concentrations of centenarians people living past 100 and the lowest rates of middle-age mortality and degenerative disease. These are the blue zones.
The locations they identified are incredibly diverse. We talked about the Barbesia region of Sardinia, Italy, in our intro, but they also identified Ikaria, an island in Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, Loma Linda, California, specifically the community of Seventh-day Adventists living there, and Okinawa, Japan.
What is vital to understand here is the genetic baseline. The Danish twin study, one of the most comprehensive studies on longevity, established that only about 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by genetics.
Only 20%.
Only 20%. The other 80% is dictated by lifestyle and environment. So Bettner's team looked at these 5 disparate cultures to find the evidence-based common denominators, but were they all doing exactly the same?
And they distilled their findings into 9 lifestyle habits, known as the Power 9. Let's walk through these because they serve as the ultimate reality check to our modern obsessions.
Number 1, move naturally. The world's longest-lived people don't pump iron, run marathons, or join CrossFit gyms.
Their environments naturally nudge them into constant low-level physical activity.
How?
They garden, they need bread, they walk to the store. They don't have mechanical conveniences for every household chore.
Number 2 is purpose. The Okinawans call it ikigai, which roughly translates to the reason you wake up in the morning. The Nicoyans call it plan de vida.
The research indicates that having a clear sense of purpose can add up to 7 years of extra life expectancy. It provides a psychological buffer against stress.
Number 3 is crucial, downshift. We assume these centenarians never experience stress, but that's just not true. Everyone experiences stress.
But the Blue Zone populations have built-in daily routines that explicitly shed that stress and prevent it from turning into chronic inflammation.
Okinawans take a few moments every day to remember their ancestors. Adventists pray. Kikarians take a mid-afternoon nap. Sardinians do a happy hour.
Notice the biological mechanism there. Downshifting is the cultural institutionalization of down-regulating the amygdala and lowering cortisol.
Number 4 is the 80% rule. Before meals, Okinawans recite a 2,500-year-old Confucian mantra called Hara Hachibu, which reminds them to stop eating when their stomachs are 80% full.
Furthermore, all of these cultures eat their smallest meal in the late afternoon or early evening, and they don't eat for the rest of the day, which functions as a form of mild intermittent fasting, allowing the digestive system to rest.
Number 5 is the plant slant. Their diets are overwhelmingly centered on beans, lentils, and soy. Meat, mostly pork, is eaten on average only 5 times a month and in very small portions, like the size of a deck of cards.
Number 6 is one that surprises people. Wine at 5. With the exception of the Adventists, people in all blue zones drink alcohol moderately and regularly.
The trick is that it's moderate 1 to 2 glasses a day, and it is consumed with food and in the company of friends. You cannot save up your weekly allowance and binge it all on Saturday night.
And the final 3 of the Power 9 are entirely focused on human connection. Number 7, belong. All but 5 of the 263 centenarians interviewed belong to some form of faith-based community.
Denomination didn't matter. Attending faith-based services 4 times a month was shown to add 4 to 14 years of life expectancy, likely due to the massive social support network it provides.
Number 8 is loved ones first. Successful centenarians put their families first. They keep aging parents and grandparents nearby or in the home, which actually lowers disease and mortality rates of children in the home.
They commit to a life partner, which adds years to life expectancy, and they invest massive amounts of time and love in their children.
And finally, number 9, right tribe. The world's longest-lived people are either born into or intentionally choose social circles that support healthy behaviors. The absolute best example of this is the Okinawan Moais.
The Moais are a profound concept. In Okinawa, children are put into groups of 5, and they commit to each other for life.
For life.
They pool their resources, they share emotional burdens, they provide financial safety nets if one of them falls ill. They journey through their entire century of life as an inseparable unit.
Okay, here is where I want to push back on everything we have discussed in the last hour. I want to point out a massive, glaring paradox.
Let's hear it.
We just spent 50 minutes meticulously dissecting neuroplasticity, decoding the basal ganglia, building atomic habit systems, and optimizing our daily schedules with the Eisenhower matrix. We talked about relentless, proactive personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that the ultimate hack to living to 100, the final secret of the blue zones, is taking a nap, tending a garden, and drinking a glass of wine with your friends at 5 p.m.
It sounds entirely anti-productivity, doesn't it?
It sounds like they're doing almost nothing. That completely contradicts modern hustle culture.
It is the ultimate twist in the research, and it is the most beautiful realization we can arrive at. Hustle culture, the way we practice it in the West, is fundamentally driven by a state of chronic hyperarousal.
We rely on infinite raw willpower to overcome toxic, sedentary, isolating environments.
And as we proved in the first section, relying on willpower and living in a state of stress elevates cortisol, keeps the amygdala firing, and creates the chronic IL-6 inflammation that literally kills us.
The centenarians in the blue zones are not reading productivity books. They do not have habit trackers on their phones. They are not white-knuckling their way through a daily checklist.
So how are they executing these incredibly effective lives without systems?
Yeah, how?
They do have a system, but if we link this all the way back to James Clear, the blue zones prove that the ultimate most powerful system is not a planner, an app, or a burst of motivation.
What is it?
The ultimate system is an environment. It is an environment and a community that naturally, effortlessly, and invisibly nudges you toward healthy behaviors. Their environment does the heavy lifting for their prefrontal cortex.
Wow. The environment is the system.
Look at the Framingham Heart Study that the Blue Zone researchers cite. It is one of the most comprehensive studies on human health ever conducted. The researchers found that behaviors and states of being are literally contagious within social networks.
Contagious.
Smoking is contagious. Obesity is contagious. If your 3 best friends are obese, your statistical chances of becoming obese skyrocket, regardless of your personal goals. But conversely, happiness is contagious. Healthy habits are contagious.
So the right tribe habit, like those Okinawan moais, is the ultimate life-extending system because it allows you to completely outsource your willpower to your community.
Exactly.
You don't need the willpower to eat a plant-based diet if the only food available in your village is plant-based, and every single person around you is eating it joyfully.
You don't need the willpower to exercise if your community's daily life involves walking everywhere together.
You don't need a meditation app to lower your cortisol if you have a group of 5 lifelong friends you can share your deepest anxieties with over a glass of wine.
You fall to the level of your systems, and your community is your ultimate system. When your environment aligns with the identity you want to achieve, success and longevity don't require hustle. They become the path of least resistance.
The water flows into the canyon naturally.
Perfectly said.
What an incredible synthesis. Let's wrap this up and summarize the journey we've just been on because it is a profound shift in perspective. We started at the absolute microscopic level, looking at the firing of individual neurons in an fMRI machine.
We proved that our biological hardware is not fixed.
Right, our brains are fundamentally designed for neuroplasticity, for a growth mindset, and for the physical anti-inflammatory recalibration that comes from deliberately practicing gratitude.
From there, we decoded the software. We looked at the mechanics of the basal ganglia, the cues, the routines, the rewards.
We learned how to manipulate our environments to make good habits obvious and bad habits invisible, allowing us to bypass finite willpower and forge an entirely new identity, accumulating evidence vote by tiny vote.
Then we scaled up to the macro architecture of a life. We used Covey's framework to move from reactive dependence to proactive independence.
We learned to claim the space between stimulus and response, and we used the Eisenhower matrix to ruthlessly prioritize the quiet, deeply important quadrant 2 activities over the screaming demands of daily distractions.
And finally, we looked to the blue zones. We discovered that the ultimate human system, the true peak of effectiveness and longevity, is not found in isolated, anxious optimization.
It is found in a slow, purposeful, deeply connected community where healthy habits are simply the default setting of the environment.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It means you don't have to do it all alone through sheer force of will.
And as we close this out, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to ponder. A synthesis of everything we've covered today.
We know from James Clear that every single action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And we know from the blue zones and the Framingham research that our behaviors, our stress levels, and our habits are highly contagious.
So the ultimate question is this. Who are the people in your life voting for you to become?
That is a heavy question.
Are you relying entirely on your own exhausted prefrontal cortex to fight against a toxic environment? Or are you actively, intentionally surrounding yourself with the right tribe?
Because if you curate a community and an environment that reflects the identity you're trying to build, then your ideal life, that century of vitality, doesn't require frantic hustle.
It becomes inevitable.
That is something to sit with for a long time.
As we finish up this deep dive, take a deep breath. Appreciate that microscopic space between the chaos of the world and your response to it, that space where your true freedom lies. Notice the tiny trickles of water in your mind that you are carving into Grand Canyons today. And take your first, small, 1% step toward curating the environment, the tribe, and the century-long life you are designing.